Welcome to the Jason de Sousa Show. Join us as we explore the evolving urban landscape, uncovering the trends, stories, and innovations shaping our cities. Thanks for watching and enjoy today's episode.
Ivan Harbour, welcome to the Jason de Sousa Show.
Welcome, Jason. Lovely to meet you. Online.
Online, yes. Well, you're dialing in from a lovely morning, I think, in London, and I hope it is going to be a wonderful day ahead of you. Of course, we're in Sydney and we're ending our day here, so glad to have the opportunity to catch up. And obviously, we catch up a lot in Sydney, given we've had the chance to work on quite a few projects together, most recently Parramatta, which is the future of Sydney.
It is, as the polycentric city, almost probably the ultimate polycentric city once it's all connected together.
Right.
It'll be a marvelously well-oiled, hard-working machine.
Well, look, we jest, but actually the metro, which we've all worked on in one guise or another, and the transformation for Sydney of a high-capacity automated metro has really changed the way this city operates, right? And that's why you're now seeing, once we see Cross River Rail come through in Brisbane, which is opening up that city, and Melbourne Metro, obviously, which you had a lot to do with from a station and architecture perspective, deep involved in Melbourne Metro. The public transport in Australia over the last sort of 15 years has really changed. And I think it's changing the way these cities operate. Would you agree with that?
Oh, absolutely. My home city is London. And of course, we love our tube system. We love it and we hate it.
Yes.
And it's constantly improving. And I think, when I look at my kids who grew up in this city, they have no interest in car ownership. What do I need a car for, Dad? I mean, it's much easier to get around by tube, by bus, all these things. The connected city is a city that thrives, and London is a great example of that. It seems to continue to reinvent itself, but and whatever the world's problems are, the problems we have in this country, it always seems to be looking forward. It always seems to be generating new possibilities, and I'm convinced that's because it's so well connected.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, I think there's a broader debate, I think, when we talk about the UK, about what's outside of London and how that's connected. And that's been the debate behind HS2 and so on and so forth. But perhaps we'll come to that another day. Before we get into it, though, so you're obviously one of the world's known architects working for RSHP. Richard Rogers, a well-known global architect. I had the privilege of meeting Lord Rogers when he was the late Lord Rogers now, when he came to visit New South Wales and visited the New South Wales Premier. I had no idea who he was at the time. I was advising the Premier on the sort of financial crisis that was facing Barangaroo at the time. And we'll come to Barangaroo, obviously. But you've been there for a long time. You're part of its DNA. Now, you are sort of one of the principal at Rogers. Do you feel that the DNA since Lord Rogers has carried through the firm, or is it more your stamp of authority now?
Well, I started when I was a youngster 41 years ago, and I was 23 years old. I was very privileged to work on what I would call the tail end of Lloyd's of London. So I spent a couple of years on that project. What was amazing about Richard was his ability really to get the best out of people. He was, I think, almost unique. Well, we're all unique, aren't we? But he particularly unique as an architect in not what I imagined an architect would be. I always thought, as a youngster, what does an architect do? He or she sits down, they draw stuff, and out comes a design. But it's not as simple as that, or as complicated as that. Richard was essentially assembled people who together could come up with great ideas, but under a global set of principles, I think. And it was the principles that really, the idea of principles in architecture and urbanism, that is something I really picked up from him.
He has designed some of the, I guess, most iconic things around the world, really. how do you live up to that kind of legacy? You know,
I think, you know,
or do you
as an
live
architect,
up to it? Is that something you
I
have to
I
do?
I see. I mean, you know, I mean, I hope I reflect Richard's ideals in that he always looked forward. I'm always looking forward. It's the next project, which is the challenge ahead, and how do you improve and get better?
Yeah.
When I joined the practice, you know, the practice had completed a handful of buildings. I've built over 100 buildings since then, and probably involved in 500 projects. So,
Yeah.
you know, within the time scale, you know, I worked with Richard for 35 years, and developing the DNA of the practice with him, and that was a great thing. It's very inclusive. I think there are moments where my involvement shifted the dial, and you know, when you look back, you know, you can't point to one particular moment when you felt you sort of inputted or drove the DNA in a certain direction. But I think it was always a collective, an evolution of the practice as a whole, and a group of people that worked and complemented each other. And that continues today. Graham, who is my, you know, was the other. He was the S in RSHP, and you know, the two of us both were put in. You know, when I was 30, Graham was also 30, when we were promoted to directors. And I remember asking Richard, "So what do you expect me to do now?" He said, "Well, just keep doing what you're doing. The reason we promoted you is because of how successful you are at what you're doing." So it was, you know, I think architecture isn't done alone. It's a team effort, and it involves not just the practice, but also involves our clients. It involves all of the consultants actually to come to something collectively together. You cannot do it alone. You have to have great clients to do great projects. You really have, you know, it doesn't work without.
I actually would take it a little further and say development is a team sport, right? You know,
Absolutely.
speaking as somebody who pulls things together for a living, you can't survive without, you know, the client capital. You can't work without the sort of governments. You can't work without your consultant architects who are, you know, the visionaries on a lot of things. You can't work without your engineering team. You can't work, and if you can't make all those people work together, you don't have a project. Is sort of my
That's
argument
absolutely
on things.
that's absolutely correct. And you know, you know, these projects, particularly large, actually even small projects, you know, they take a long time. You have to be stoic when you're doing architecture and development. You
Well,
must always.
even winning a job just can take years, you know, and
That's
particularly the major projects where year after year you're positioning, you're designing, you're thinking about things, you're bidding, you're, you know, baffling, you're doing all these things, and 3 years later you might have a deal. You know, it's sort of, and we do it to
that's
ourselves year in, year out.
We do. I think what, you know, over my time as an architect, the one thing that probably has changed the most is the extent of involvement in a project, from the introduction onwards. You know, 40 years ago, it seemed as if people had made the decision they wanted to do something, and then you were appointed as the architect, and you went off and did it. But today we get involved from the outset. We hear about all the pain that it takes to get to the point where historically we would have perhaps been appointed. So you breathe that up to that point, and I think that's in a way that's a really good thing, because I think it brings us as architects down to earth to understand those complexities, and it's not just about pretty drawings.
It's funny you should say that. I always tease the architects that, you know, do you guys ever think about commerce, right? Like, you know, like, you know, really, like, have you ever thought about, how we might actually sell this? And I was joking around with somebody, you know, around, it was an architect. Architects shouldn't invite me to things, right? Because I'm like, you know, it was a sort of esoteric, thought-provoking thing about, you know, about how people could, you know, be more socially inclusive by not including balconies and apartments. And I'm thinking, well, okay, so you're a nurse, you've been on your feet for 18 hours. You come home, you just want to knock your shoes off and have a glass of wine on your balcony. But no, you can't do that because you're going to go downstairs and be included in society. I wasn't very popular at this particular. Anyway, that aside, at your heart, you're a master planner, right? And our great friend Avtar always describes you as one of the world's great master planners, and I find that interesting because what is master planning? When you think about it.
I don't describe myself as a master planner. I have to say, I'm an architect, but I think, I'm actually, in my heart, the things that most interest me are how things are put together, how stuff is made, and the complexity of that. And I got into architecture through making stuff. I was really interested in making. When I was at college in the early 80s, at that time, what's called postmodernism was the big thing, and it was all about references to history. I didn't get any of this stuff. And one of the reasons,
post-truth, isn't it?
I think so, yeah. One of the reasons I joined Richard's practice, because it seemed to be doing things differently. It seemed to be interested in how stuff went together. And I think that extends to cities. What I'm really interested in is how it all happens, how all of this stuff, whether it's pipes and wires in buildings, whether it's let's say metro lines, roads, and laneways, or what have you, things that stitch buildings together, things that stitch cities together, are all the complexities. So I'm interested in those. I'm absolutely fascinated by. And I think this is probably a big influence that I've had on the practice. Is it's all about people first for me, and as an architect, the people are your ultimate clients. Everyone, and if you're doing a metro, you literally is everyone.
That's true.
And you can only judge success by how you performed in delivering for people. So for me, the master planning is an extension of architecture. It's part of architecture in that it's thinking about how people engage with our built environment, from a room in a building to the city itself.
You sort of do think a lot about public space, though, in the way you've been approaching a lot of your work, right? I mean, I have done a little bit of research. You made a quote, a statement recently, where you said there is no space that can be too small as long as everyone's allowed in it. Now, I read that in an architecture publication, by the way. So there you go. That's how deep my research is. But I thought it was a really great point, though, because if you look at some of the stuff you've done, like Barangaroo, which we'll come to in a second, there are a lot of small spaces in it, and they are all about accessibility of people going through it, and people being in it, and people being around it. So, can you tell us a little bit more about your view on public space in the way you approach things?
I mean, accessibility to public space is critical, in my opinion, and it has to be completely democratic. There can't be exclusions. I'm seeing, we built a building in the City of London, the practice, where it basically gives up the whole of 6 stories of prime frontage on the street to everyone. And we have lots of neighbours that are going up around us who have a viewing gallery on top of the building. Now, the viewing gallery, you see queues of people looking rather forlorn and waiting to get their bags scanned so they can go through the side door to the top of a building and have a look, and then, I guess, come back down again and leave. There's no engagement, in my opinion, with the city with that approach. So I think that, and this applies to all building typologies, whether it's commercial buildings, whether it's public buildings, obviously, that I think we have we have an obligation to give back to the public. I think it's good for the value of the property itself. You're raising the quality of the building in its place, and by making public space work that way, it's a win-win for everyone, I believe. I think when it comes to the scale of space, if you imagine, and it's about what's your emotional attachment to space. And I'm talking about urban spaces here, not let's say not broad landscapes. It's not about the beach. This is about sort of, let's call it, human-made inner city spaces. The places we like to hang out on are places where we can feel comfortable. It's about our scale. It's people's scale. Bringing people's scale to people is more straightforward, let's say, in a tighter urban environment. Everyone loves a laneway. Boy, it's more active than a 50-meter wide street designed for 6 lanes of cars that you can't walk across. I mean, that's not a good city space.
Well, we're seeing the opposite right now, where people are saying, can we please have a 17-meter walkway and wide walkway? And people saying, well, it's a bit wide, isn't it? Not really going to feel, not going to feel warm and close.
Yeah, I mean,
do you find though that in this discussion around space, though, that the public space gets crowded out? Because that used to be the case, right? That people wanted private buildings, private space, private lobbies, private building lobbies, private viewing decks, and sort of ground planes sort of became dead in sort of back in the world of the 80s. But that's not the case now. Do you still find that there's a threat to public space in the work you're doing around Europe and Asia and wherever?
I think there is. I think that it's different in different parts of the world. There's still this, unfortunately, there's still a sort of an idea that public realm belongs outside of the gates, and then you create a separate world, and actually the value is in that separation. We do our best in those environments to try to. I mean, almost, let's say, similar to some of the Georgian squares in London, where even though you couldn't actually access the garden in the centre because you didn't have a key, you were at least able to experience it by walking past it and engaging with it. You do the best you can. I think that I think the work we've done in Sydney, the work we do in London, it's on it's a more, let's say, a more sophisticated level, and that engagement can happen. I think the example that we have in Sydney at Barangaroo is very good, because it is as we know that it's essentially curated, not necessarily by the city itself, but it's still accessible to everyone. So I don't think it purely I don't think there's the purism that says, and I know there are some architects have this view, it cannot possibly be public if it's not owned by the state or the city. Yeah. I don't believe that, and I think that's very limiting. I think it's we sweep our street outside our house because it's our bit of the pavement, and it's a pride in the neighborhood thing. You don't have to be the town hall to instill that pride. You can do that yourself, and if we all collectively do it, it improves the city.
That brings in that sort of social compact question as well, right? But I mean, is there a city that you think has done that really well? Or do you think it's a mix?
I think you get great parts in good examples in lots of cities, but there are as many bad examples in the same cities as there are good examples. I think it boils down again to development. I think the best developers understand the value of good public space that engages everyone, including the people using, people passing by, and I think let's call them not such visionary developers. Usually they're the ones that hang on the coattails of those ideas, but don't consider that they need to add or extend that impact.
Right. Yeah. Let's go to Barangaroo quickly because we've talked about it a couple of times. So we've obviously interfaced a lot in Barangaroo. Your office is there. I was at Lend-Lease for many years and still am there a lot. It's a wonderful place. I think for our viewers and listeners, it's important to know it was a port. So this was a container port. It was like a large slab of concrete when the containers were removed, and for many years, it was a large slab of concrete where events were held. I had the Millennium Dance Party that I went to on the Barangaroo slab back then. It was it was a lot of fun. But that aside, um, you were once you once said that you set out to be radical to turn Sydney's back door into a new front door, and that was the way you were thinking about what we could do with this former waterside port. Do you think we achieved it?
I think you achieved more than we ever imagined, to be honest. I think I'm absolutely bowled over by its success. And I think collectively Lend-Lease, our client, imagined that, certainly we could get the critical mass there to make things happen. But no, I don't think anyone believed it would have such an impact to beyond the neighbourhood, to Sydney-siders generally, and actually, I know people who visit Sydney from London and they go to Barangaroo. It's hit not only the neighbourhood, the people that work there, the people that live there, but also people who visit both from the city and from abroad. It's become the place to hang out in the evening. I mean,
The waterfront is wonderful down there, isn't it? It's
special.
Just all the restaurants there are packed all the time.
Yeah. You have to remember that on the outset, I was told no one looks west. It's bad. West is bad because of the setting sun, and it's a problem. Sun's in your eyes, and also, we want to look out to the sea. So this is the back door, and I also recall being told this isn't the centre of the city. Don't believe you've got lots of money to build these buildings. This is more Canary Wharf than the city. So with these in mind, I think it was a serious challenge. But I think the great thing that was that everyone was up for the challenge, and everyone brought into the fact that although it seemed to be miles away, in terms the wrong side of the ridge, the wrong side of the tracks, whatever you call it, it was actually extremely close, and it is extremely close to the city core. So connecting it, I remember saying we've got to get a sign that says Wynyard Station. If we can get it to that sign on the doorstep of Barangaroo, it'll be successful, because mentally, once you've hit the sign,
you see the station. That's right.
You're in the station, even if you've still got to walk the same distance to get there.
So true.
I think that there were some key moves that helped make that massive change, and a lot of them were about connectivity. In fact, I would say most of them were about connectivity. And then in the fine grain, I think the other radical nature of it was the battle between, and from the outset, we started by saying, we got commercial towers. This is a financial engine that has to make all this happen. The expectations are commercial lobbies, addresses, and need to come to the street so you can be dropped by taxi, and all this sort of conventional thinking. Interestingly, the city, our first proposal very much sort of separated the lobbies of the commercial towers with, let's say, the street grain. And the city, after we won the competition together off at Barangaroo South, the city said, we're not happy with this arrangement. We think you should get down to ground and mix this all up. So it was the city that drove us to rethink. And some of the most radical moves are to put to mix those lobbies up, put them not on the primary streets, on the secondary streets. All these things were not what you did. but they're the things that make the place work. And I
interesting,
recall,
because they were so opposed to the project overall
oh,
at the time, and so that's
well,
fascinating, right?
I mean, you can. I don't mind you publishing this one, but of course, Clover Moore. When I showed her around after when it was me, back in 10 years ago now, when we completed the first buildings, and it was starting to come about. She said, actually, it's rather good, isn't it? But of course, I'm not allowed to say that.
I
But
think she'd
that,
be all
look,
right now. I think enough time's passed
we
that the
all
Lord
have,
Mayor probably will.
we all spend a small time on this planet. The fact is that Barangaroo has changed that city, changed your city, and it's been a pressure relief valve for the city, actually, and that's what I think it is also. Its impact is beyond its site. Its impact has gone to the whole of the city of Sydney, and I think that we're all building buildings for 60 years ahead of our time. So we can't think about yesterday or even today. We've got to think about tomorrow. And so a lot of the moves about this city working with a transport system less reliant on the car, being carbon zero in operation, being designed to be a great place to be. It was the first WELL Platinum. The office buildings, first WELL Platinum buildings in the world, but we designed it way before WELL was even an idea. So I think that is remarkable. All it's saying is that the sense that, and WELL, for everyone to know, this is about how good it is. What does it feel like to be in the place that has been designed for you? How good is it for you, for your emotion, and for your well-being, literally? So that's a really good sign.
I think one of the great things about it is the streets. The streets of Barangaroo. It's actually called the streets of Barangaroo, and actually you have active cars and people crossing streets, and it does actually feel like we have threaded a new part of the city into the old part of the city. And the connectivity was very difficult for government. I mean, when I was in government, the big debate was around the funding of Wynyard Walk. And
Yep.
Should Wynyard Walk be funded by the taxpayer, or should it be funded by the project? And there was this great debate going on. And the project, people think now, these things generate millions and millions and millions of dollars, but it went through several property cycles.
Yeah.
And it wasn't all smooth sailing in terms of the financing of this thing. And Lend-Lease made some serious bets, led by Steve McCann at the time, who I had the privilege of working for a while. He took some serious bets to make that happen, and it worked. Right, it worked, and that's the beauty again of architects and commerce coming together to sort of make something happen, right? But I do think that the fact that cars are allowed into the precinct and are going around the precinct actually gives it activity. It gives it purpose and activity, which is what makes it special. Whereas there's places that cars aren't allowed, for example, that somehow lack a bit of activity.
Oh, yes, no, we were very clear that we shouldn't exclude vehicles, but it shouldn't also be designed solely around vehicles. And
that's right.
The master plan that we all took on board, and was essentially business as usual. It had parceled the land up, and it was surrounded by streets, and everyone had a backyard and a front door. The ability to do it as a whole was a great opportunity to do exactly what you're saying, which was to say, right, let's decide where the cars need to be, where the people need to have priority over the cars, how we can limit the number of back doors. And that's one of the real pluses in the neighborhood, is the fact that we have only a few very discreet ramps to the biggest building of all, which is the one below ground, that makes all this function. It means every building faces a front door, and I think that for the continuity of the retail and the opportunity to create all sorts of types of different space, and not have the sort of hierarchy of let's say the New York hierarchy of the streets with back doors and the streets with front doors. Those things are so positive for the environment and gave it a very good start, sort of and kickstart, let's say. Wynyard Walk for everyone, of course, is the door to the station. So for me, it's the station,
and it has the sign Wynyard Station.
Wynyard.
And look, and that's true. I mean, if you know, I'm from Hong Kong, as you know. Like, if you go through Hong Kong Station to walk through Central Station, it takes a very long time.
Yeah.
Like, it's and that's okay. But you're in the train station. You feel like you're in one. I think the other thing, while we're thinking about Barangaroo, that I really like is the podiums. On the sort of three towers, when you don't feel like you need to look up at a skyscraper. You don't sort of really notice the skyscraper, really, do you? Because you sort of feel like you are in an area that feels like you're meant to be there. It's not oppressive in some way. And I think that podium design is something that was quite deliberate, was it not?
Yes, we had many discussions around, I call them the street buildings, because the podium to me seems a very American. You've got this building and you've got a thing that sort of hits the ground. And there was a lot of conversation about, first of all, the density. And I have to say, I still, having built it now, I think we could have probably made the radial streets that connect you from the station to the water. We could have made those slightly narrower. That would have given more area, of course, but next time. And also the height of them was important. And what I've been saying to people is that what we tried to do is get the streets as tight as they could possibly be, and to design those buildings and to sort of set design standards for those buildings where we had sort of things like cornices that project out, that as you walk around, they really can almost sort of terminate one level, and it allows the towers to happen above. And I think that there was a lovely statement, one of our colleagues, David Rolls, who took his mum round, I think, after the project had come together and for lunch, and after lunch he said, "What do you think about the towers?" And our answer was, "What towers?" So quite often we refer to the project as "What towers."
Well, David Rolls, a dear friend of both of us, will be very excited he was mentioned on this podcast. So there you go. Do you think, you've worked on a lot of projects involving government? In just a recent example would be Melbourne Metro. Government is increasingly becoming a counterparty in all these very large scale major projects. Barangaroo, they're the landowner, they had a large role as the authority. I guess two questions. One, is that your experience in other jurisdictions where you have government as a counterparty in these sort of very large mixed use projects? And two, do you see more of that happening?
I think, architecture and let's call it urban design rather than master planning at this scale is inevitably has a level of politics to it, and therefore government, whether it's local, whether it's national or regional, let's say state, in the case of Australia, government, it has to be involved. And I think it's a good thing, but I do think that the balance with development partners, are using the expertise of developers in concert with, I guess, just being what's the word? What's word I'm looking for? You are responsible in the end for the people you're delivering for, which is the population. And so government, in a sense, are representing the population, and to remind you of those wider obligations. Our experience, we had a very particular experience in Barangaroo, where it was state government was the connection. Although, we started with more city involvement, as we know they pulled away. There were political spats going on. But that was a shame in a sense. But one hopes that in the future they'll perhaps learn from that lesson and not walk away, because it's their responsibility too. I think in Melbourne we worked with state, and we worked closely with the city there. So that was much more coordinated, and everyone wanted the metro, so they were all on the same page.
Well, it is interesting. We're about to enter the next generation of major projects, right? So we've got Blackwattle Bay, which is a waterfront precinct here that Movac are going to be delivering. Stockland are doing Waterloo Estate, which is a bit like Elephant and Park, Elephant and Castle rather, which is a very significant affordable housing, social housing project. And that both have government as a counterparty. And the next big one here in Sydney is the Base Precinct, which the government has announced recently as being a very large-scale residential project that they're going to bring to market. So I think a lot of the lessons you're talking about at Barangaroo are going to come into play here, because those same push-pull factors between policy and design and commerciality are going to come into play in all of those projects, particularly now where construction prices are so challenged.
Yes. My advice would be, if it's worth anything, would be that, you have to hang on in there, and because if you don't, then you don't know, you will have by definition, you'll have no input, no control. But I think the important thing is to understand that everyone in the process has a skill set to deliver the right outcome. And what you mustn't do is allow one to override all of the others. It's got to be a fight. It's got to be a balance. And I think that's where, if you have the right architect, that will help. They can help sort of mediate that process by all continually, as I say, from my experience, the one thing is these things are not static. They're continually evolving. We redid the master plan at Barangaroo South umpteen times. It was constantly evolving, and it has to, and it had to respond to commercial pressure. It had to respond to political pressure, and it managed those things. In that context, I think there was the one thing I regret about Barangaroo was losing we'll call it the public building, the hotel on the water, that went politically. It was a political. It was given politically with political change, and I think that was a missed opportunity. We got planning permission for it. It would have been more special than what we have today, and I think it would have. I think we would have been not that would necessarily have made it any more successful. It'd been hugely successful anyway, but I think it would have been maybe put the whole development more on the world stage, because it would have been actually ultimately more radical.
So I was in government at the time to work for that decision. And the politics I found really odd was, we're privatizing the harbour by putting this hotel on the water. We're privatizing the harbour. I'm like, okay, right. And the government's view at the time was, by giving in on this privatizing the harbour narrative, it actually gave the project a green light to proceed. It actually took the politics out of the project. And I understand that now, I think, in hindsight. But at the time, I was like, this is ridiculous. What do you mean? I come from a town where, we're constantly reclaiming and building on the harbour. It's constant, right? What are you talking about? So it's sort of, there are unique political characteristics to every jurisdiction. I think that's a particularly interesting Australian, characteristic, that one. But that's a good segue actually into office, because I wanted to get to that before we run out of time, because the Barangaroo is very large floor plates, right, of the family of buildings, and they were deliberately designed that way because it had that financial services sort of focus. But things have changed since then, haven't they? Now we're in sort of a situation where post-COVID, office has, the identity of office is changing. We've seen a lot of subletting in buildings. In Sydney, and I'm not sure what the case is in London, but certainly in Sydney, hasn't really been a lot of new office development. We had Simia Chopra on the podcast from CBRE saying office prices will be strong because there's no new supply. What are you seeing with office? Is there a place for the office going forward from where you sit as an architect?
I mean, I believe there is. When we talk about office, I think for me it's workplace.
That sounds a lot more eloquent when you say it.
Yeah, it's workplace as opposed to, let's say, manufacturing place. So it's where people get together and you do stuff together. And I think that the way that the significant take home from COVID was understanding what a work-life balance is. And I remember doing an interview at the beginning of COVID saying, "Oh, don't worry," because of course everyone wanted to predict the demise of architecture because no one wants buildings anymore. We'll all be at home on the screen. And I say, well, that's all very well for you and me who might live in a nice house and have a living room, but for someone living in a bedsit or in a shared house, I'm not so sure it's such a great thing. We are human beings. We're social animals. Offices exist because to do stuff, we enjoy being together and doing it. We learn from each other. There is worry that the learning you get just by being in the place as a youngster. And we both look at our own our early careers. Just being there and just listening to the dynamic and engaging with that is something you can't replicate online, in my opinion. I think totally. Office space, let's say if you look at London at the moment, we're just building like crazy in the city of London. And the reason that I'm told for that is that we had some pretty poor office space. I mean, there's a lot of, let's say, mid 20th century buildings, which, really were sort of office sweatshops. There was nothing other than your desk and nothing beyond that. So we're currently building lots of what's called grade A office space. And what that means now is it's space which has access to air, access to greenery, but it's also has the flexibility to bring people together in different ways. I don't think to a point, the scale of the floor plate is the question, and certainly what we're being asked for. Our floor plates are not really much smaller than they've ever been. Really? How you divide them up and how you use them is the debate. And I think, Barangaroo, as an example, I regard those as they're big floors, but they're quite democratic floors. So actually the access to light is pretty good. And they're sort of like stage sets. You can they have scale that allows you to create sort of different environments within them. So I think that level of flexibility is super important. I think that the ability to engage in lots of different ways with your office or your working day, and then buildings that support that, and certainly seem to be the direction. And in my mind, what I'm seeing in London, and I have to say we're behind Australia in terms of workplace for sure. What we're seeing is London, we're catching up with what Barangaroo has done, the other work that we've done in Sydney at Chifley Square, where it was about workplace environment. You guys are big on that, and I think we're learning from you. So I'm seeing great invention happening in London. I'm thinking, well, I saw this 10 years ago in Australia. So I think, but just you guys, you've got your standard of living, the enviable lifestyle is something that I think us Londoners are beginning to think, maybe we need a piece of that. So that's probably what's reflected where we are. And maybe you're seeing it less in Sydney because, a lot of the office, the way you've treated workplace environment has been more positive anyway. You may have a different
Interesting.
question, which is just, possibly it's I mean, I can say, I mean, this is just a hypothesis, but we have a very well-connected city, so there's no excuse to being into work. It doesn't take 5 minutes, and boy, it's better at sitting at home in your bedroom eating a last night's dinner for lunch. Whereas your city, although it's expanding its connectivity, is still not as well connected as
Not
London.
anywhere near London or Hong Kong or any of these places, not even close.
So
Yeah.
my hypothesis might be that it sort of makes it easier to say, well, if I stay at home today, because it's a bit of a trek to get to work, maybe your city's concentration now on developing metro and that connectivity, it will be a positive, because if you can get about, then it's better to be at work with your colleagues, learning from them, I think, than being at home learning from a computer.
And look, I worry a little bit about, those of us who are fortunate enough to now be in stages of our careers where we've got people working with us. I know plenty of partners in law firms who stay at home in their beautiful study that they've had designed by Ivan Harbour, and have their inbuilt screen, and they have their meeting with their team all back at the office, and then they go and walk their dog. That's not a pathway to success, sort of remark. But I did have a little chuckle at the idea of a grade A building from a British context. But anyway, but that's fascinating. What about you were talking earlier about, actually, it prompted me to think about it, about, well, we don't need architects anymore because, no one will need a building anymore. But then it sort of brings in AI and what that means for architecture. So, and, it's something that I think we've been talking a lot about sort of on this show in generally, is AI is here. It's in business now. My firm uses it. We started to use AI in some of our financial modeling. We're starting to do it in some of our presentations. Our analysts are using it. It's great. Cool. But what does that really mean for creativity in architecture? What does that mean for you? Are you using it at all in RSHP?
We are using AI. We've been dabbling with it for probably 4 or 5 years, just looking to try and understand how it can help us. It certainly is developing into a useful tool to assist. The most obvious aspect of that is helping us deliver visual imagery of something we've done. We're very clear about keeping our AI within our organization, so that we're not putting our thinking out there, because that is our IP.
Yeah, confidentiality is important.
Yeah, it's interesting, this. I don't know what AI is going to do. I think anyone who does is probably not telling the truth. We don't really know what's going to happen, do we? What I would say is that when I think about, I remember Richard asking me this question. So, one of the things I'm quite good at is being given a blank sheet of paper and just putting some lines on it and beginning a conversation. And I guess if I've got an ability, it's that. And Richard asked me once, he said, so how do you design? And I said, something, Richard, I haven't got a clue. And what I realized is it's about intuition, it's about experience, it's about intuition, it's about emotion, your decisions. This isn't a science, so decisions are empirical. They are, there's no correct answer, and so it's a balance that comes from your intuition, what you think the best direction might be, and that intuition comes from your experiences, and your experiences can be from anywhere. I mean, they're not necessarily, and I'm always telling the young architects off when they do this, say, I've seen a building that looks a bit like that. I said, don't show it me, because if you look at an image of something that you've seen, that'll go into your head. I'm thinking more, when we get back to first principles, what made the hair stand up on the back of your neck, when you went to a place which you thought, actually there's something, what is it about this that makes this work for me? So it's that emotional aspect that then gets brought in and starts to help you. It gives you that intuition to say, well, in terms of the direction of travel for the idea, let's say, what's the founding idea? Is that a way that will that we can develop as a sort of concept that we can then roll forward? I don't know how AI can do that, if it can, because people, you could say that novels record emotions, but I don't think they. I mean, they're one person's view on something, but I don't see how, let's say, a machine that can't yet smell, taste. I mean, how does it? Those things. A good meal can make a good place feel better, and they might connect. These things are the stuff that sit behind certainly proposition and decision making. The other point, which I remember again, some youngsters say, "Oh, you'll be out of a job because of AI," and I said, "I don't think I will." And he said, "Well, why not?" I said, "Because I spend huge amounts of other people's money." Now, in that instance, I can't believe that those people, let's say developers or other, would entrust that to a machine. Because if something goes wrong, which it will with a machine, as it does with people, there's no one they can point a finger at. And so I think, us, and, we have huge PI insurance and what have you, for the reasons that it's a risky business architecture. And actually, it's a human business. We're making our cities for people. And the successful ones, I think there's a lot, the amount of emotion that went into making Barangaroo across the hundreds of people within the, let's call it the broad design team, which were a small part, and the thousands of people that made it. I don't know where AI would sit with that, other than being an assistant.
Is it sort of an assistant though? That, like, I remember in Barangaroo, like the Lend-Lease had a huge documentation team.
Yeah,
like they were everywhere, right? Do you see sort of AI taking over those sorts of roles, like documentation, compliance, engineering drawings? Is that something that you think might be assisted by AI?
I think it will. It is very likely that it will be able to help, and it already is beginning to get involved in that. But at the same time, it doesn't avoid us checking as humans, as being the people sort of on the line when it comes to something going wrong, checking that information. So it can't just go out of the door without that human intervention. And in terms of documentation, actually, in terms of compliance, you also remember that a lot of rules and regulations are essentially written for the majority of construction, which is sort of small scale housing, let's say. The big projects we do, we're always pushing the boundaries. I mean, you can't, for example, an airport can't fit into the compliance method of a two-story house. It just simply is not like that.
Doesn't work.
So we're always negotiating the right answer, engineering the right answer. I mean, fire engineering, for example, is an obvious point there, where there are very strict rules. Fire is the same wherever it is, all over the world. There's no difference. A fire is a fire. But there are a surprisingly number of different ways that people manage fire, and some countries will accept fire engineering. I believe Australia is one of them. Some countries won't. They simply won't. They won't negotiate it. And so there's in a country that won't negotiate it, well, fine, AI could probably help. It could probably help define, but it won't tell me more than I already know, which is maximum, let's say 500 square meter or 5,000 cubic meter volumes between fire breaks or what have you.
Do you think the young architects that are coming up in your firm are thinking differently because they're growing up in an era of AI? and social media and whatever else. Like, I think, you mentioned earlier, don't show me that building because it will affect your mind. But now we're sort of in a digital world where you're just being bombarded constantly by Instagram, LinkedIn, or AI is telling you to do things, or surely that must be shaping creativity in different ways.
Absolutely, it has to be. I haven't managed to make that change yet, so I have no
so you're
idea.
protected.
But you should.
This show is published on Instagram as well, just by the way, so you'll see yourself.
Fine.
Your interns, I'm sure, will be watching it.
Oh dear. Look, inevitably, as I was saying, your experience and your intuition comes from that experience. If you're engaging with that media, of course, it's going to impact on you. And let's be positive. One of the great things is the access to information, possibly too much. So maybe there's going to be less naivety. I don't know. But whatever.
Oh, you are hopeful.
Yes. Whatever when I think about some of the things we did in the past, I think, why were we naive? Yeah. But the naivety is a good thing, It's because it's often said that big moves in history were made often by people who were in some level on the spectrum. They weren't thinking like everyone else. Galileo was not thinking like everyone else. I mean, how can you make those moves? So I think one hopes that with that access, almost, the amount of access you have to information, the sort of unending, you will still be able to have an intuitive or emotional response to what you're seeing and react perhaps in a particular way, which is perhaps something that no one ever imagined before. And so we should be positive that things can only become perhaps more interesting than they have been to date.
Well, Ivan, I think that actually is a wonderful point to end, because I think your optimism is infectious. And I think that everyone will have found this very, very interesting indeed. So look, I hope you'll come back again one day, because you've got so much more. I actually, before I let you go, before I sign off, like what are you seeing that's interesting globally? Because you're working in multiple countries. If there was a project that you go, oh geez, I'm really enjoying. It doesn't have to be one of yours. I'm really enjoying seeing that come up. What would it
be? What I think is really interesting is the rate at which we're seeing countries around the world thinking seriously about our future on the planet and how that is impacting what we're doing. I think despite global political positioning, I think that you're seeing that genuine concern is something that's going to be mirrored in and reflected in what we're doing, and in a way that we're just scratching the surface. I go to Shenzhen. We're doing a number of buildings in Shenzhen, and on the surface of it, they're not as sustainable, let's say, as as where we might be in Europe and Australia. But I have a sense that China's going to, when you see what's going on in Shenzhen, you see the cleanliness, you see the use of electrified transport. I have a feeling China is going to get there first, and it will be something and it'll be an amazing day. I think one day they'll tell us we are now carbon neutral. You can come and have a look.
Well, I was there recently myself, actually. It's quite remarkable, given the fishing village I grew up next to. Ivan Harbour, thank you so much for being on the podcast.
It's a pleasure. Thank you, Jason.